My name is Thomas, born in 1105 on the vast, enigmatic lands of Wiltshire. The life of a farmhand was simple, even grueling, but the endless green fields and the expanse of blue skies above brought a sense of solace. It was a comfort I clung to as the world darkened with the whispers of war. When the Crusades began, my older brother William, driven by tales of glory and faith, left for the Holy Land. I remained, anchored to the family farm, burdened with the weight of responsibility and the unspoken duty of keeping our home intact. Yet, this duty soon turned into something far darker. One cold and mist-draped night, as I tended to the animals, I noticed something amiss in the wheat field. A scarecrow, one that I had never placed there, stood tall amidst the golden stalks. My breath caught in my throat. Its clothes were new, but something about it felt profoundly wrong. It was garbed in a heavy, dark fabric that brought to mind the cloak of a knight. Yet, the material was worn, torn, and stained with what could only be dried blood. The eyes, buttons of jet black, seemed to pierce through the gloom, following me with a malevolent intensity that set my skin crawling. The field, once a place of peace, now felt hostile, as if the earth itself recoiled from the malevolent presence standing guard among the crops. The days that followed were plagued by an unsettling tension. The animals grew restless, their eyes wild with fear, and the once thriving crops began to wither, despite the fertile soil and ample sun. Rumors swept through the village like a plague, tales of witchcraft and curses, brought back by those who had returned from the Holy Land. Fear tightened its grip on my heart, an icy hand that refused to let go. Our village, already haunted by the grotesque stories of the Crusades, of slaughtered innocents and desecrated holy sites, began to sink deeper into superstition. People whispered of vengeful spirits, of curses that pursued the Crusaders across oceans and continents, trailing them back to their once safe havens. Each night was filled with prayers, desperate pleas for protection, but the fear remained, gnawing at our souls. I felt an immense, almost unbearable responsibility, not just for my family, but for the entire village. The burden pressed down on me, growing heavier with each passing day. One night, a sound roused me from my restless sleep. It was a faint, dragging noise, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt of terror through me. Grabbing a torch, I ventured into the night. The mist clung to the ground, swirling around my feet as I approached the field. There, under the pale light of the moon, the scarecrow was moving. Its straw legs scraped across the ground, stiff and unnatural, yet undeniably real. I was paralyzed, my limbs frozen as it drew closer. "Thomas," it whispered, its voice like the rasp of dried leaves on stone. "The sins of your brothers pursue you." A cold, suffocating dread settled over me. My mind raced, desperately trying to grasp what was happening. Was this a vision? A nightmare? But the voice was so clear, so chillingly real. My brother's sins I knew nothing about, sins I had never committed, were they now mine to bear? In the days that followed, I threw myself into unraveling the mystery of the scarecrow. My search led me to dark places, stories of crusaders who had committed atrocities so vile that they had cursed their own souls. The innocent dead, slaughtered without mercy, had risen in fury, seeking vengeance on the families of those who had wronged them. The scarecrow, I learned, was not merely a straw figure. It was a vessel of wrath, a symbol of vengeance fashioned from the garments of a man hanged for witchcraft. A man whose death had been but one part of a greater, bloodier tale. The truth left me hollow, my fear tempered by a grim resolve. I knew what had to be done. On a night when the wind howled like the lost souls of the damned, I set the scarecrow ablaze. The flames consumed it, crackling and hissing, as if the very fire was alive with anger. I prayed, fervent, desperate prayers for forgiveness, for redemption. The blight that had settled over our fields lifted, but I could not shake the feeling that the darkness was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of sight. Sleep offered no respite. Night after night, feverish dreams tormented me. Visions of blood-soaked battlefields stretched endlessly, the cries of the innocent echoing in my ears. The disfigured faces of the dead haunted my every thought, their hollow eyes filled with an unending thirst for justice. I felt my sanity slipping away, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. One night, a familiar sound woke me. A soft, dragging noise that I'd hoped never to hear again. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the window. There, standing in the middle of the field, was a figure that should not have been. Its form was unmistakable, a ghastly silhouette against the pale moonlight. "Thomas," the voice came again, hollow and unforgiving. "Sins never die." The words were like a knife, twisting in my gut. My breath caught as I realized that the curse had not been lifted. It had merely shifted, its form ever-changing, its hunger insatiable. The weight of my brother's sins, the sins of countless others who had marched to war in the name of God, now lay heavy on my soul. Desperation drove me to seek help. At dawn, I journeyed to the hills, where a hermit known for his knowledge of the occult lived in solitude. His eyes, old and filled with ancient wisdom, bore into mine as I recounted my tale. He listened in silence before handing me a small, rough-hewn amulet. "Only through true penitence," he said, his voice gravelly with age, "can you hope to find peace. Redemption is a path long and treacherous." I returned to the village, determined to confront the darkness that had taken root in our lives. I gathered the villagers, revealing everything I had learned. Together we prayed, not just for ourselves, but for those who had suffered at the hands of the Crusaders. A purification ceremony was arranged, and as we lit bonfires, the flames reaching towards the heavens, we chanted songs of repentance, our voices trembling with the weight of our guilt. The air grew thick with smoke, and from the haze, a figure emerged. It was the scarecrow, or rather, the spirit that had taken its form. It stood there, motionless, as if waiting. "Thomas," it spoke, its voice now softer, almost mournful. "Your quest for redemption has begun, but the path is long." And with that it vanished, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the lingering scent of smoke. The ceremony ended, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a sense of calm. From that day on, I devoted myself to penance and charity. The fields flourished, and the village found some peace, though the shadows of the past lingered. Yet, even now, under the full moon's eerie light, I hear whispers in the wind and see shadows in the fields. The scarecrow, a haunting reminder of unforgiven sins, remains with me, a constant sign that the past, no matter how deeply buried, will always return to demand its reckoning.
I, Alaric of Valsam, write these words in the dying light of a flickering candle, with trembling hands and a heart crushed by despair. If you find this parchment, know that what I am about to share is not a tale of myth or legend, but a dreadful truth concealed behind the veneer of noble dignity that our family has worn for generations. The year was 1347, and the pestilence had begun its relentless march across Europe. An unseen killer sparing neither lord nor serf. Our estate, nestled on the outskirts of Grimsburg, a small city tucked away in the shadow of the Black Forest, had been spared. Grimsburg was a place of ancient stone buildings, narrow, winding streets, and towering spires that reached toward the heavens, as if in a futile attempt to escape the darkness below. The city was known for its scholars, its monasteries, and its libraries filled with ancient tomes. Yet there was always something oppressive in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press down on those who walked its cobbled streets. My father, Lord Gunter of Valsam, attributed our estate's immunity to the plague to our strict devotion to God and the vigilance of our household. But even then, something dark lurked beneath the surface of our blessings. The trouble began when Heinrich arrived. He was a scholar of grim countenance, well-versed in the arcane and the obscure. He claimed to have studied in the universities of Paris and Bologna, yet something about him always seemed wrong. He had a way of looking at people, as though he saw straight through them, peeling away their flesh to glimpse the soul beneath. It was not long after his arrival that the first signs of horror began to manifest. It was a cold night in late autumn when I first heard it. The sound of chains, heavy, rusted iron, dragging across the stone floors of our manor. I dismissed it as a trick of the wind or the groaning of old timber, but the sound persisted, night after night. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to echo within my very skull. My father, ever the pragmatist, dismissed my concerns, but I could see the unease in his eyes. The first strange event came soon after. A servant, Anna, was found lying on the cold stones of the east wing, her body lifeless and still, her face etched with an expression of pure terror. Her limbs were contorted, as though she had experienced a profound shock. There were no marks on her body, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain how such a fate could have befallen her. The other servants whispered of curses, but my father would hear none of it. He ordered her buried quietly, as though she were nothing more than a stray animal. But I could not forget. Anna had been with our family for years, a kind soul who had cared for me when I was but a child. To see her reduced to a lifeless husk, discarded so easily, filled me with a deep, gnawing dread. And the chains, they grew louder still. Grimsburg was known for its old-world charm, but beneath its quaint facades and the orderly conduct of its citizens, there was a pervasive fear. The city was built upon older ruins, remnants of a time long forgotten. And there were stories, dark stories. It was Heinrich who approached me next. His voice was low, almost a hiss, as he spoke of ancient rites and forgotten gods. He claimed that our family was bound by a curse, one that stretched back centuries, to a time when our ancestors had dabbled in forbidden practices. He warned that the strange occurrences would not stop with Anna, that the chains were a herald of something far worse. I did not want to believe him. Oh, how I wished I could have dismissed his words as the ravings of a madman. But the truth, the horrible truth, was that I could feel the curse in my very bones. It was as if the air itself had grown heavy, thick with the weight of something unseen, something malevolent. More unusual events followed, each more disturbing than the last. A young maid was found with an inexplicable pallor, her vitality seemingly drained away. A stable boy was discovered in the manor's courtyard, lying motionless, as if struck down by some unseen force. And always, the sound of chains, dragging, clinking, closer and closer. My father grew increasingly desperate. He ordered Heinrich to perform rituals, to cleanse whatever malevolent presence plagued our house, but it was to no avail. The rituals only seemed to agitate whatever entity haunted us. Heinrich himself grew more erratic, muttering to himself, his eyes hollow with fear. One night, as the winds howled outside and the shadows danced like specters upon the walls, I confronted Heinrich. "What have you brought upon us?" I demanded, my voice quivering with barely contained terror. Heinrich looked at me, his eyes dark, sunken pits of despair. "It is not what I have brought, young master," he whispered. "It is what has always been here. The curse of Valsheim. It is in the very stones of this manor, in the blood of your line. And now it has awoken." I felt my heart seize in my chest. "Awoken? What do you mean?" "The sins of your ancestors," Heinrich rasped. "They were never forgotten. They are here with us, in this very house, and they will not rest until they have claimed you all." I could scarcely breathe. The weight of his words pressing down on me like the iron chains I could still hear, clinking just beyond the door. What can we do? How can we stop it? Heinrich shook his head, a tear tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. "There is no stopping it. The only way to escape is to leave this place, to forsake your name and lineage. But even then, the curse may follow. It is bound to your blood." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Forsaken my lineage, abandon the house of Valsheim? The thought was unthinkable, yet the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. But I was too late. That very night, Heinrich was found in his chambers, the iron chains wrapped around his neck, his face contorted in a way that suggested unimaginable suffering. My father, upon discovering the scene, collapsed. His spirit broken, he never spoke again, slipping into a state from which he would never recover. I was alone now, the last of the Valsheim line, with only the cursed manor for company. The chains, they were inside me, within my very soul. I could feel them tightening, constricting, as if they sought to crush the life from my body. One night, driven to the brink of madness, I took a torch and made my way to the oldest part of the manor, the crypts where my ancestors lay. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls were slick with moisture. As I descended into the darkness, the sound of chains grew deafening, a cacophony that threatened to shatter my mind. In the deepest chamber I found it, a great iron door, ancient and rusted, sealed with chains as thick as my wrist. I knew, without being told, that this was the source, the heart of the curse that had destroyed my family. With trembling hands, I raised the torch, preparing to burn it all, to rid myself of the horror that had plagued us for so long. But as the flames licked the ancient metal, I heard it. A voice, soft, pleading, calling my name. It was my mother's voice, though she had been dead for years. "Alaric, my son, do not do this." I froze, the torch trembling in my grip. "Mother?" I whispered, my voice choked with disbelief. "Please," the voice continued, "do not burn the door. You do not understand. You cannot imagine what lies beyond." Tears filled my eyes, and the chains, Oh God, the chains. They were in my mind, wrapping around my thoughts, dragging me down into the abyss. I could feel them tightening, squeezing, and yet I hesitated. How could I destroy the last remnant of my family, the only link to my past? I dropped the torch. In that moment, I knew I had failed. The chains, now part of me, clinked softly as they settled into my soul, their cold weight a reminder of my folly. I staggered back, the oppressive darkness of the crypt enveloping me. The voice was gone, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound of chains. I do not know how long I lay there in the dark before I found the strength to return to the manor. The once grand halls now seemed like a tomb, cold and empty. The servants had fled, and my father was nothing but a husk, locked away in his room, waiting for death. I am the last of the Valsheims, bound by the chains of our sins, by the curse that no one could escape. I write this now, in the hopes that someone, someday, will find these words and understand the horror that has befallen us. But I fear it is too late.
My name is Jacques, born in 1320 in the city of Paris. The city, a vibrant center of commerce and culture, has always been my home. Paris was a web of narrow streets where the sound of carts mingled with the lively chatter of merchants. But in 1348, the Black Death turned our city into a living nightmare. The life that once thrived on every corner now withered away quickly, leaving behind only despair and death. One dark night, as I was returning home after a long day of work, I saw a hooded man standing at the corner of an alley. His eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on me. What the hell does he want? I thought, as a chill ran down my spine. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, and I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the sinister premonition. In the following days, death seemed to follow my every step. My neighbors, one by one, succumbed to the plague. The air was thick with the stench of decaying bodies, mingling with the aroma of burning herbs in a desperate attempt to ward off the disease. The hooded man appeared every time someone died, like a sinister raven waiting for its prey. Each encounter with him made my heart race faster, a mix of fear and curiosity growing within me. I decided to follow him. One night, hidden in the shadows, I watched him silently walk through the deserted streets, his black robes flowing as if they were part of the darkness itself. He stopped in front of an old abandoned church, its doors creaking as they opened. Inside, the scene was one of pure horror. A skeletal figure, shrouded in a black cloak, murmured words in an ancient tongue. Around him, corpses formed a macabre circle, and the hooded man knelt, offering a bloody piece of human flesh. I fled back home, my heart pounding wildly. Cold sweat dripped down my forehead, and my mind was filled with images of death and darkness. In the following days, the plague seemed to avoid me, but the hooded man continued to appear in the distance, always watching. The feeling of being observed grew stronger, and my sleep was plagued by terrible nightmares. One night, as I walked down my deserted street, I encountered him again, closer than ever. He lifted his head, revealing a pale skeletal face. "Jacques," he murmured. "Fate cannot be avoided." My blood ran cold. Fear paralyzed my body as he approached. I felt a sharp pain in my chest and collapsed to the ground. When I awoke, I was alone, but the sense of terror did not disappear. Days passed, and the death ceased. But then, on a moonless night, I heard a sound coming from the street. I opened the door and saw the hooded man again, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He extended his hand, revealing a silver amulet. "This belongs to you," he said, his voice as cold as death. As I took the amulet, a chill ran through my body, and a terrible vision filled my mind. The plague was not over. It had merely changed form. In a final attempt to understand, I returned to the abandoned church. The darkness inside was oppressive, and the smell of death was stronger than ever. On the altar, the skeletal figure was there again. But this time, it turned and looked directly at me. "Jacques," it said with a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of hell, "you are destined to serve death." I felt a pull on my soul, as if something was trying to rip it from my body. With a final effort, I managed to flee the church, but the vision of the hooded man followed me. Each night, he appeared closer, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes watching me. Now, as I write these words, I feel his presence drawing near. The silver amulet he gave me is on the table, pulsing with a sinister energy. I know he is coming for me, and that my escape is impossible. The true nature of the plague, the curse he carries, is something that cannot be defeated. The hooded man is death itself, and he will not be denied. The real horror is just beginning, and I know my time is running out.